Well, if you're watching this talk on Facebook, welcome. It's so encouraging to see the numbers grow each week of those who are listening, and one or two of you sometimes get in touch, which is wonderful. And I'm hoping that you're going to put it down in your book that you're going to turn up sometime in Norwich and visit this old chapel. You're very, very welcome. And do pray that God would use this chapel more and more for his glory. There is a little history book that you can find called The History of the Old Meeting Congregational Church. And you can find that on our church website. And I think it's also on Amazon. And it's only a short little thing, but that'd give you something about the unique history that God has used this chapel since it was founded in 1643. I don't think it's an accident that you're listening today, because I do believe that God has a message that he wants to speak to you today. I always like a title, and I get told off by those who come here if I don't. And the title today has come from a saying from a Christian Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Have you read any of Marcus Aurelius? I'm going to mention him in the talk, but he said this: live as on a mountain. And I thought, wow, that would make a good title for a talk. So that's the title, Live on a Mountain. And the text I'm basing it on today is Matthew chapter 17 and verse 1. It's part of the story of Jesus of the Transfiguration. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. Now, I expect you will have heard that Norfolk is said to be one of the flattest counties in the UK. But if you are a cyclist, you might not believe that, as, believe me, there are still some steep hills. And even on foot in the city of Norwich, there are several hills. So, what do I know, living in a place where there are no mountains, about mountains, you may ask? Well, they have actually played an important part in my Christian life. Back in 1969, I went for the very first time to the Keswick Convention that is held in the Lake District. And during that week, I spent a considerable amount of my time on my own, climbing up the fells, as they're called there. It was a week that radically changed my spiritual life. And as I have looked through the Bible, mountains played an important role in the life of Jesus. In fact, nearly every great event of his life was associated with some mountain or other. It was on a mountain that he faced one of his fiercest temptations. It was from a mountain that he delivered the greatest of his sermons. It was on a mountain that he chose the 12 apostles. It was on a mountain that he was transfigured. It was on a mountain that he was crucified. And it was on a mountain that he ascended to glory. If you read the Gospels, you cannot help but realize that Jesus loved mountains, as he often spent his time there. Here, for example, in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 23, we read, "And after he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into the mountain apart to pray. And when even was come, he was there alone." Now, this is one of the things he frequently did during his ministry. After a busy and exacting day in the crowd and the busy city, Jesus sought relaxation and renewal by stealing away to the cool and quiet hills. Today, more and more people want to get back to nature. We must not forget that God is the creator, and by getting back to nature, we are in fact getting back to him. And Jesus appreciated this ministry of nature. He loved the silence that is in the starry sky and the peacefulness of being away from the crowd. But more than this, he wanted this communion with nature to bring him closer to God, his Father. As the verse says, he went up into the mountain apart to pray. We must remember that our Lord lived a busy life, often in the public eye. His life was full of comings and goings, so that he had little life for himself. He had very, very little leisure time. And it was only by stealing away after nightfall to the solemn and quiet hills that he found the opportunity for the loving and intimate fellowship with his Father that even he could not live without. And Jesus not only sought the mountain for himself, but he encouraged his disciples to seek it as well. We read these words in Matthew 17, verse 1. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. It was an acted principle. It was a counsel put into practice. So if we are in earnest about following the example of Jesus, we shall often draw aside into the mountain apart to pray. We need to be connected to the God of creation. I wonder if you've ever heard this old saying, God made the country, man made the town. I wonder if you can remember what was said of Isaac in the Old Testament. He went out to meditate in the field at eventide. And there is little doubt that the field helps the meditation. The quietness and the beauty and the spaciousness of nature all help to bring God near to us. The God with whom we often lose touch sometimes in our modern world and in our crowded cities is very real when we can spend time in the countryside. I'm pleased to see that there is a growing number of people who seek to go on retreats to recharge their spiritual batteries, as it were. A few years ago, I was able to spend 5 days in a monastery of all places, and I found it to be a real boost to my own spiritual life. The Mount of Communion must be a place to which we regularly go. Live, says Marcus Aurelius, that wisest and most Christian of Roman empires, who was emperor of Rome from AD 161 to AD 180, as on a mountain. Perhaps I'm going to put a different meaning to this saying than he had, but I have found it to have profound meaning which I'm praying that God will help me to pass on to you today. We must live as on a mountain if we want our lives to be great and noble and victorious. We must, in short, become mountain men and women. Let's think what a mountain does for us. In other words, let's think for a few minutes about the ministry of the mountain. One of the first things that comes to my mind is the importance of solitude. We're often told, aren't we, that man is a gregarious animal and that he was not meant to be alone. He has the social instincts and only arrives at the full stature of manhood as he enters into relationships with others. But at the same time, we must remember that man is not just a gregarious animal, he's also an individual. He has cares, burdens, responsibilities, sins, which he often finds hard to share. And just because he is an individual with his own individual burdens to bear, man cannot always be in a crowd if he is to realize who he is. There will have to be times of reflection when he must commune with his own heart and God. Many people today do not understand monasticism, where the monk sacrifices his duties to society to the care of his own soul. But is there not a danger that we could fall into the opposite error? Is there no danger that in our social activities we might forget the private need of the soul? If you were to ask me what the most pressing peril of our times is, I think I should answer, to use a phrase borrowed from the poet Wordsworth, the world is too much with us. Have you heard that one before? The world is too much with us. We are too much in the crowd. We are careful and troubled about many things, and we're often, even in the Christian church, to be in touch with our own souls. So, if you ask me what our greatest and most urgent need is today, I would have to say more quietness and more time to meditate and think. In other words, a more frequent retreat to the mountain. Can you remember that startling lesson Isaiah alleges for the apostasy of Israel? For the many calamitous mistakes Israel was making? Here it is: my people do not consider, or, to put it still in more unmistakable language, my people do not think. They've never reviewed their lives quietly and seriously before God. And surely that is what is the matter for so many of us today. We do not think. Many of us have made irreversible mistakes. Many of us make hideous ruin of our lives, all because we do not think. All of us need to spend time alone with God. We need to spend more time on the mountain, for somehow things that seem right to us when we are in the crowd look so different. When we're in the crowd, look so different when we look at them together with God. But as it is, we mar and disfigure and sometimes spoil our lives, all because we never give ourselves a quiet time. My father told me, who was a minister, he got so busy that the first thing that went out of his life was the quiet time. What was it that Spurgeon said? If you get busy, you'd need to get up an hour earlier. It's the quiet time is the place that we get our power. The second thing that mountains speak of is altitude. So it's not just about being quiet, but also to have the opportunity to get a different view or perspective. That's why people clamber up to the tops of hills in our country, for the view they get from the summit. Have you done that? I know I have. I've taken a few photographs from the top of some mountains. Wow, what an experience. Now, those of you who've travelled the country, you may have come across a small town in Shropshire called Church Stretton. Do you know it? Which in Victorian times was known as Little Switzerland. In the town, there's a certain walk known as the Pole. The Pole is 116 metres high and is the highest point in the encircling hills. And everyone who visits the town climbs to the Pole because from it your eyes can roam over a magnificent landscape, from Snowdon on the northwest to the Malvern Hills on the east and the Brecon Beacons on the south. As you know, the higher you climb, the further you can see. The people in the valley enjoy nothing but a very limited and restricted view. It is the man or woman of the mountain who can look out on the great world and who really knows how the land lies. And it's very much like that with our human experience. For it is not only as you stand upon the mountain with God that you can see life as a whole. I wonder if any one of us can remember how John Bunyan, in his dream of the Delectable Mountains, in his Pilgrim's Progress, brings his pilgrim to these mountains. And in the morning, the shepherds asked them to walk with them. So they went with them, enjoying the scenery as they went. The shepherds took them to several summits, to the mount called Error, where they showed them the ghastly precipices, and then to Mount Caution, where they showed them the path that led to Doubting Castle, and then to Hillclear, where they gave the pilgrims the perspective glass with which to espy the gates of the celestial city. And although for the shaking of their hands they could not steadily look through the glass, yet they saw something like the gate and caught a glimpse of the glory of the place, which was only John Bunyan's way of saying that when men and women stand on the mount with God, they see the perils of earth and the glories of heaven. They learn what to avoid and what to seek. They understand the real meaning and purpose of life. But the sad fact is that so many never climb the hill at all. They live on the low levels, down in the valley, and the valley makes up the whole of their little world. They have no outlook or perspective. They live as if the world only consisted of gaining sex, money, and fame. And that is not to be surprised at all, for if they never climb the mountain, they can never see the view. In the book of Revelation, we read these words in chapter 22 and verse 10. And he carried me away in the spirit to a mountain great and high, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. So unless a man or woman has climbed that great and high mountain of communication, they can never see the holy city. And if they never see that holy city, heavenly Salem, vision dear of peace and love, they will naturally only live for the prizes and pleasures of earth. And that is what I see today in our country. Multitudes living on the low levels, multitudes toiling and working in earth's valley with never a thought of what lies beyond. Materialism and the pleasures of this earth are the order of the day for so many around us. Scripture seems to suggest that men and women may live on different levels, and the levels on which they live determine the things for which they seek. I find, for example, that Paul speaks of the flesh level and the spirit level. There are some that live after the flesh, he says, who are absorbed in the material and sensual, and that is all they desire. But there are others who live on a loftier level. They live after the Spirit, and consequently, spiritual things are all their passion and pursuit. And to the man or woman who lives on this mountain level, after the Spirit, the things of the flesh seem insignificant. You know how dwarfed objects in the valley appear when you look down on them from a height? And equally insignificant the wealth and honours and pleasures of life appear when you view them from the Mount of God. Here is what St. Paul's view concerning this is found in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 8. What is more, I consider everything loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage that I may gain Christ. The Puritan Samuel Rutherford spoke the language of the mountain level when he said, "Sell, sell, sell all things for Christ. An hour of Christ is worth a world of words." Again, James Guthrie, the Scottish Presbyterian minister who was hanged on the 1st of June 1661, said, "Sirs, his cross hath been paved over with love to me all along, and it is sweeter now than ever. Oh, my sweet lot this day, for me to go to a gibbet for Christ and his cause." Or what about the American missionary David Bernard, who lived from 1718 to 1744? "Had I 1,000 lives, I would lay them all down at the feet of Jesus Christ." This is the speech of the mountain level. So on which level do we live? On the valley level or on the mountain level? What are the things that are most important to us? The things of the flesh or the things of the Spirit? What is our world? The present and fleeting world of time and sense? Or does our vision embrace the world to come? Lest we commit the tragic and fatal blunder of loving the world and giving our life to the world and grasping at prizes that turn to dust in our hands. Let us go often to the mountain and through the perspective glass of faith gaze on the glories of the celestial city. For it is only as we see the better country that we shall be able to live as pilgrims here and now. And thirdly, the mountain is not simply for quietness and the view, but is a place to resort to for health-giving power. There's nothing like the mountain for bringing new vigor into tired and jaded bodies. People who are utterly worn out and exhausted often seek advice from their doctor, who tells them they must get away from it all and take a long break. And just as our bodies need a break, so do our spirits. Listen to this verse from Isaiah 40 and verse 31. I hope you know it. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That's one of the reasons why our Lord himself sought the mountain so often as he did. And so should we. There are tasks confronting many of us as individuals and churches that we can only accomplish by regular resorting to the mountain. In Mark chapter 9 and verse 29, we read these words of Jesus. This kind can come out only by prayer. To fight the evil in our souls, to fight the evil in the world, we must again and again resort to the mountain. When we neglect to do this, we can become powerless and lose our passion and cease to be attractive to the world. Lastly, the mountain not only gives us its quietness and the view it gives and the new health it bestows, but also it's a place where we can find peace. In the book of Psalms, the psalmist tells us in Psalm 72 and verse 2 that the mountain shall bring peace to the people. Surely it is not unusual for a mountain climber to find that when they reach a certain altitude above the clouds and mists and storms which trouble and harass the valley below, above them they can enjoy rich, glorious sunshine. This is certainly what happens when we climb the Mount of God. In the world, on that level, we have tribulation. But in me, on the lofty level, we find peace. That is only found in Jesus, that we must climb the mountain to obtain it. So, quietness, vision, power and peace, they are all mountain blessings. Crave them, seek them, and be resolved to possess them. They are more precious than rubies, and all the things we can desire are not to be compared to them. And if we frequent the mountain of communion, there is yet another mountain to which our Lord will one day bring us. We shall come at last to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to the spirits of just men and women made perfect. Can we say amen to that? Are we mountain dwellers? Do we resolve to the mountain? How many of those around us, even in the churches, dwell in the valleys? We need a different perspective. We need to spend more time with Jesus. If Jesus needed to do it, so must we. Amen. Here we are.